People think disappearances follow some pattern. A wrong turn, a fall, a moment of confusion. But some events do not fit anything known. They happen too close to witnesses, too fast, and in places too simple for a person to vanish inside them. These are the cases that feel like a cut in the timeline. No warning, no sound. A person is there. Then they are not. This incident is one of the clearest examples of that gap. 4 adults from Oregon went on a short hike inside a narrow canyon not far from Hell's Canyon. The trail was classified as easy. The weather was stable. The temperatures mild. The group was familiar with the outdoors and carried enough basic equipment for a day hike. According to the 3 who returned, nothing about the morning suggested any risk. There were no loose rocks, no recent slides, no wildlife activity, and no other hikers on the route. The canyon walls rise sharply on both sides, but the trail itself is level and obvious. It narrows at several points, forcing people to pass single file. The group moved slowly, talking, keeping the same pace. They stopped twice for water. Nothing unusual happened during the first half of the hike. About halfway in, the trail curves around a large boulder pressed against the canyon wall. The rock blocks visibility for a brief moment. You walk around it and immediately see open trail again on the other side. The entire blind spot is less than 3 meters long. The man who disappeared was walking second in line. He was close behind the first hiker, less than an arm's length. The 2 hikers behind him stayed almost the same distance apart. The formation never broke. There was no separation. As they approached the boulder, the first hiker stepped around it. 2 seconds later, the missing man followed. The 2 hikers behind reached the corner right after him. That was the full timeline. There was no pause, no delay, no sound before or after. When the first hiker reached the other side, he expected to see the missing man right behind him. When he did not, he turned back toward the corner. The space behind the boulder was empty. The 2 hikers behind arrived, assuming the missing man had stopped, but he was not there either. The group searched the immediate area first, calling out, checking both sides of the trail, and looking up the canyon walls. Nothing moved. Nothing responded. There was no falling sound, no loose debris, no sign of slipping. The terrain behind the boulder was flat, compact, and dry. Any disturbance leaves a mark on that type of dust. It recorded the footsteps of the 3 hikers clearly, but there were no fresh impressions belonging to the missing man beyond the point where he stepped out of sight. The canyon walls near that spot are too steep to climb without equipment. The surface shows scuff marks easily, but investigators reported no climbing attempts, no hand marks, and no loose fragments. There are no ledges, no cracks large enough to enter, and no side channels or drainage routes. The 3 remaining hikers walked the entire section repeatedly before calling for help. They checked every place a person could fit. The distance was too small for him to move far. The curves were too shallow to hide behind. The silence was constant. No echo changes were reported. No wind shifts. No light distortions. Nothing that might distract attention even for a second. When search teams arrived later, they repeated the same path measurements. The gap where the man disappeared is measured at under 3 meters. A person cannot exit that space unnoticed with 3 witnesses within reach. Yet the trail shows only 3 sets of prints continuing forward. The disappearance was logged as unresolved. No further evidence was found in that canyon. And this was only one of several group cases where the environment offered no possible route for a missing person to take. If you want to follow the investigation of the next case, stay with the series. Search teams reached the canyon less than 2 hours after the call. The initial expectation was that the missing hiker had climbed onto a ledge or slipped into a crack the others did not notice. But the terrain did not match any of those possibilities. The walls rose almost vertically. The surface was rough but not climbable without gear. There were no handholds, no footholds, and no signs of recent rock movement. Rangers began with a standard grid search. They measured out the area behind the boulder where the man was last seen. The open section is small enough that two people standing opposite each other can cover it completely with their line of sight. The dust on the ground preserved footprints clearly. 3 sets entered the space, and 3 sets left it. There were no fourth impressions on either side of the boulder, no partial tracks, and no drag marks. The surface looked untouched past the point where the man stepped out of view. Handlers brought in a dog team. The dogs were given scent from the missing hiker's pack, which the group still carried. Both dogs pulled toward the boulder, reached the same termination point as the footprints, and stopped. They circled once, returned to the same exact spot, and sat down. They did not attempt to track in any direction along the canyon. They did not signal movement toward the walls. They simply stopped at the same location the prints ended. Rangers checked the canyon walls for any sign a person might have climbed or slipped upward. No scrape marks, no loose dust, no dislodged stones, nothing to indicate vertical movement. The walls above the boulder lean inward slightly, making it physically unlikely to gain height from that position. The team expanded the search outward, walking the canyon in both directions. The trail has no junctions. There are no side paths or alternate exits. The canyon is narrow enough that any movement off the trail would leave visible disturbance on the loose gravel or the sparse vegetation. No such disturbance was found. A thermal scan was conducted at dusk. The canyon traps heat, allowing warm surfaces to be detected after sunset. Nothing resembling a human heat signature appeared within range. Crevices and shadowed areas remained empty. Interviews with the 3 hikers produced consistent accounts. Each described the same timeline. The man stepped behind the boulder. The first hiker noticed the absence immediately. The 2 behind reached the corner seconds later. No one reported sound. No shift in air. No unusual lighting. No movement of animals. Nothing that suggested activity in the canyon at that moment. All 3 insisted the missing hiker was within arm's reach seconds before disappearing. The search continued for 2 full days. Teams checked the canyon floor, the base of the walls, and the exposed rock surfaces. Volunteers walked the ridge above the canyon, looking for debris or signs of someone climbing out. No evidence turned up. The canyon geometry makes it difficult for a person to exit without leaving marks. None were present. By the end of the operation, the incident commander noted that the scene lacked any indication of direction. Most disappearances leave at least one actionable clue. Here there were none. No tracks, no sound reports, no dropped items, no environmental anomalies. The trail simply recorded the arrival of 4 hikers and the departure of 3. The case remained open, but inactive. The missing hiker was never located. The canyon section where he vanished is still used by visitors, and the layout has not changed since the incident. There are no new structures, no new routes, and no physical explanation for how a person exited that space without leaving evidence. 2 adults disappearing at the same moment on open ground is one of the rarest patterns in missing cases. Open terrain normally removes all doubt. You can see movement, you can track direction, you can hear distance changes. But in this incident from Idaho, none of those expected indicators appeared. The layout offered full visibility, yet 2 men disappeared inside a space where nothing blocks a line of sight for more than a few seconds. 3 hunters entered a wide meadow before sunrise. The area is open enough that you can stand at the tree line and see most of the field without obstruction. The group had hunted there for several seasons. They understood the terrain, the ridges, and the shallow rise at the far end. They walked in a line, 2 ahead, 1 behind, all within clear visual contact. The ground was ideal for tracking. Short grass, thin patches of dry soil. Footprints remained visible for hours in those conditions. The men moved slowly, discussing positioning and checking the wind direction. Nothing unusual happened before they reached the middle of the meadow. No other hunters were seen. No animals crossed their path. No weather shift occurred. The 2 men in front approached the rise first. The slope is low, no more than a mild incline. It does not hide anything for long. A person stepping behind it disappears for a second or two at most before becoming visible again. The third hunter, walking 15 meters behind, watched them approach the incline. According to his account, they stepped over the top and went out of view for a brief moment. When he reached the same point, the men were gone. He expected to see them continuing ahead, angled toward the tree line or adjusting their path. Instead, the area in front of the rise was empty. There was no movement on either side, no sound, no sign of a sudden change in direction. He looked back across the meadow to confirm he had not misjudged the distance. Nothing indicated that the men had turned around or stopped. He walked to the bottom of the rise, scanning for tracks. Their footprints led up the incline in a straight, consistent pattern. On the far side, where new prints should have continued, the ground was undisturbed. No impressions, no breaks in the grass, no marks indicating a jump or slip. The trail simply did not exist past the top of the rise. The hunter checked ahead, then to both sides, calling out repeatedly. He expected at least an echo response. The meadow usually carries sound well, but his calls produced nothing distinct. He described the atmosphere as flat, with no noticeable echo bounce, something he said was unusual for that area. He moved down the meadow toward the previous hunting markers, hoping the others had shifted position quickly. There were no new tracks there either. The summer grass was upright and undisturbed. The dry soil showed older prints from previous days, but nothing fresh enough to belong to the two missing men. By the time he returned to the rise, he had already called for help. He later said that the timing was what troubled him the most. There was no window long enough for two adults to leave the area without being seen or heard. The rise does not provide cover. The ground ahead offers no dips or gullies. The distance between him and the two men was too small for them to break visual contact for more than a moment. The response team arrived quickly due to the terrain's accessibility. They documented the footprints leading to the rise. They photographed the ground conditions, the soil texture, and the footprint depth. Every measurement confirmed the same pattern. 2 sets of prints leading up the incline, and no corresponding prints leading away. There were no signs of distress, no equipment left behind, no indication of a fall, no marks suggesting running or sudden turns. The meadow remained still, with nothing to indicate what direction the two men had taken. The search operation began less than an hour after the call. Responders reached the meadow quickly because access roads run close to the tree line. The first ranger on scene walked straight to the rise, expecting to find at least some physical clue that the two hunters had changed direction or attempted to leave the area. Instead, he saw what the reporting hunter described earlier: 2 clean sets of prints going up the incline, and nothing beyond it. The rise is small. From the top, you can observe almost the entire meadow. There are no gullies, no sudden drops, and no vegetation thick enough to conceal movement. Even at a jog, 2 adults would remain visible for a significant distance. The ranger walked a full circle around the incline, scanning the soil for impressions. Nothing appeared. The grass on the far side was upright, showing no signs of recent contact. Dry soil patches were intact, with no new disturbances. More responders arrived and formed a line search across the field. They swept the area from the rise outward, shoulder to shoulder. The meadow's surface conditions gave them a clear advantage. Any step taken by a human in that terrain leaves a pattern. But as the teams moved, they reported only old, degraded tracks that did not match the fresh prints leading to the rise. No indication suggested the hunters took even a single step beyond the point where their footprints ended. The search extended into the bordering tree line. Dogs were brought in from a nearby county. Handlers allowed them to smell jackets retrieved from the vehicle the missing hunters had left at the parking area. Both dogs independently led their handlers to the same location, the top of the rise. They circled twice, paused, then sat facing the same direction. They did not track to the forest. They did not pull toward the meadow. They did not continue along the perimeter. Their behavior matched scent termination, something handlers rarely see in open ground disappearances. A helicopter arrived shortly before sunset. The meadow is ideal for aerial observation because it lacks canopy cover. Thermal imaging works well there. The pilot swept the entire area, then expanded the search perimeter. No heat signatures consistent with human presence appeared. The camera picked up deer far from the field, but nothing closer. The aircrew reported no signs of recent disturbance on the ground, and nothing resembling movement or hiding behavior. Responders documented environmental conditions carefully. Wind was light. Visibility was high. Temperature remained stable. No sudden weather changes occurred. Nothing interfered with sound. The reporting hunter said he heard no noise before or after the disappearance, and the responders confirmed that calls traveled normally during their sweep. They heard each other across long distances. If the missing hunters had shouted, the sound would likely have carried. The team also measured the incline itself. The distance the men were out of sight is shorter than expected, less than 1 second of blind time for someone standing at the right angle. Multiple responders reenacted the approach, walking at the same pace. Even when they deliberately tried to break line of sight, they could not stay hidden for more than a moment. The space simply does not allow for prolonged disappearance. No dropped items were found. No signs of a struggle. No evidence of rapid movement. No impressions indicating running or slipping on the incline. Every check produced the same result. 2 footprints, sets going up. Nothing coming down. Nothing going forward. Nothing left or right. By the second day, the search expanded beyond the meadow into surrounding forest grids. Teams pushed out several kilometers in multiple directions. Not a single clue surfaced. No clothing, no gear, no prints, nothing that could be linked to the missing adults. The meadow incident log ends with a brief note from a ranger assigned to the perimeter sweep. He wrote that the disappearance lacks a direction of travel, which in search terms means there is no starting point for continued tracking. It is one of the few situations where responders did not generate even a hypothetical route. With no evidence to follow, the operation was reduced, then closed. The 2 men remain missing. Families do not usually disappear together. When something goes wrong on a trail, it is almost always a single person who separates from the group or makes a mistake. A coordinated disappearance involving 2 adults and a child, with witnesses only minutes behind them, is extremely uncommon. This case occurred on a short section of trail in Virginia, where full visibility should have prevented any loss of contact. It happened on a weekend morning when the trail was busy. Conditions were normal. Clear sky, stable temperature, dry ground. Several hikers reported seeing the family. A man, a woman, and their young child. They moved at a steady pace. There was nothing unusual in how they walked. No signs of fatigue or stress. Their final confirmed sighting placed them heading toward a small wooden bridge on a straight line of open trail. The bridge crosses a shallow runoff channel that rarely holds more than a few centimeters of water. The area is open in all directions. Low vegetation, clear ground, no obstacles, no side paths. Anyone approaching the bridge from behind can see the far side easily. The family should have remained visible the entire time. The hikers following them were close enough to maintain a clear line of sight. They estimated the distance at 30 to 50 meters. The family never left that view until the trail dipped slightly toward the bridge. The dip is shallow, less than a meter. It does not hide anything for long. When the group behind reached it, the family was gone. The hikers paused, assuming the family had stepped off to look at the water. But neither side of the bridge showed activity. They checked the banks, which are open and mostly flat. There were no fresh footprints in the damp soil near the edge. No marks in the shallow runoff. No sound. No movement. No sign of the 3 people anywhere in the immediate area. The hikers walked a short distance ahead, expecting to see the family continuing along the trail. The path is straight for a noticeable stretch after the bridge, with no places to exit without being seen. The surface is a compact mix of dirt and leaf fragments. It records impressions easily, but no fresh tracks appeared. The dirt showed older prints from previous hikers, but none matched the tread pattern of the footwear described on the missing adults. The group behind checked the trail going backward, in case the family had turned around silently. They found no evidence of that either. Visibility in the opposite direction was even clearer than the area around the bridge. No movement was seen at all. The child's last confirmed location added another detail. A man on the trail earlier reported seeing the child carrying a small yellow toy. When searchers arrived later, they located the toy about 30 meters past the bridge on the right side of the trail, resting on a branch roughly 2 meters above the ground. The branch was stable, showing no fresh break. The placement did not show impact marks or scratches. It looked set down rather than thrown or dropped. No other items from the family were found. The toy was the only object connected to them that appeared out of place, but it did not indicate direction of travel. The location where it was found did not match the last known position based on witness accounts. The hikers who reported the disappearance stayed at the scene until responders arrived. They repeated the same timeline each time they were interviewed. The distance between them and the family was never large enough for the group ahead to move out of view without being noticed. The trail layout does not support any fast exit. There are no dense sections to enter, no steep slopes, no hollows, no structures. All 3 members of the family vanished somewhere between the approach to the bridge and the 10 meters beyond it, in an area that offered no cover and no concealment. Responders reached the trail within an hour of the report. The first ranger to arrive walked the section from the last confirmed sighting to the bridge and then across it, checking the ground carefully. He expected to see at least one directional clue: a footprint, a bent plant, some indication of which way the family moved. Instead, he saw only the same pattern the witnesses described earlier. The trail showed older, faded impressions from previous traffic, and nothing fresh belonging to the missing adults or the child. The bridge itself became the first focus point. Rangers inspected the wooden planks for any marks. There were no scratches, no broken boards, and no signs of a fall. The runoff below held only a thin layer of water and soft sediment that easily records footsteps. That sediment showed nothing. No tracks entering or leaving, no streaks from shoes, no sign that anyone stepped down at all. Searchers expanded outward. They checked both sides of the water channel, even though it was shallow. The banks were firm and exposed. If the family had tried to walk along the stream bed or beside it, the soil would have shown compression. Nothing indicated movement. The surface looked the same as it had during routine trail maintenance earlier that week. Handlers brought in scent dogs. Each was given items from the family car at the trailhead. 2 separate dog teams independently tracked the scent toward the bridge. Both followed the same path the family was last seen walking. Both reached the start of the bridge and paused. They circled lightly, then stopped in place. No pull forward, no pull backward, no indication of a side trail. It was the same termination behavior seen in cases where a scent source is lifted from the ground rather than moved across it. Rangers continued the search past the location where the yellow toy was found. They checked the limb it rested on. There was no bark damage, no disturbance to the leaves around it. The branch had no signs of recent bending. The toy did not show marks consistent with impact. It appeared clean, with only a small amount of dust from the trail. Searchers could not determine whether it had been placed deliberately or dropped from above, but the absence of ground impact suggested it had not fallen from a height. The search area expanded rapidly. Volunteers arrived. Additional responders were called in. The surrounding terrain was mapped into grid sections. Each grid was walked repeatedly. The location offers high visibility, and teams could see across large sections without obstruction. Even with that advantage, no sign of the family appeared. A helicopter flight covered the area before sunset. The canopy near the trail is thin, allowing thermal imaging to work effectively. The flight logged 0 heat signatures matching human size in the immediate area or in the surrounding forest. Only small animals were detected. The helicopter made multiple passes, widening the search radius each time. Night searches continued with lights and thermal equipment. Still nothing. No sound. No movement. No reflective material. No scent continuation. No changes in the environment that might suggest direction. Interviews with hikers who saw the family earlier were rechecked. None of them reported behavior that indicated stress, conflict, or confusion. The family did not leave the main path. They walked consistently. They did not stop for long. Their pace matched other hikers that morning. The only unusual detail became the timing. The gap between the last confirmed visual and the moment the family disappeared was measured at under a minute. Rangers later reviewed the terrain again to ensure no exit route had been overlooked. There was no steep embankment, no hidden drop, no dense vegetation pocket, and no alternative trail. The area has no structures, no abandoned foundations, and no underground access. Every direction around the bridge offered visibility for tens of meters. With no tracks, no scent trail, and no eyewitness who saw the family leave the path, the incident remained open without a defined search direction. The location produced no answer to where the three people went, or how they exited a space that gave them nowhere to hide and no cover to move behind. Trail runners rarely disappear on marked paths. Their routes are predictable. Their speed keeps them in open view, and their gear usually records movement even when visual contact is lost. In this case, from Colorado, two experienced runners vanished on a straight section of trail with no turns, no obstructions, and no terrain features that could hide a person for even a brief moment. The pair had run the same mountain trail several times before. It is a popular route with consistent visibility and wide spacing. There are no sharp corners, no sudden drops, and no side trails for several kilometers. The entire stretch is lined with light gravel and packed soil, which holds footprints well and shows disturbance easily. The morning was clear. The air was dry. Visibility across the ridge was excellent. They started their run shortly after sunrise. Both wore GPS watches, which recorded pace and location as usual. The early part of their route showed normal movement. Their pace matched previous runs. Their rhythm was steady. Nothing unusual appeared in the data. According to another runner who saw them about 20 minutes before they vanished, both looked relaxed and focused, with no signs of fatigue or distress. The critical section is a long, straight line of trail with open space on both sides. The ground slopes gently downward on the left and rises gently on the right, but neither side provides cover. A person moving away from the trail becomes visible from multiple angles. The surface is consistent throughout, leaving clear impressions when stepped on. It is one of the least complex parts of the entire route. Another runner approached from behind at a slower pace. He reported seeing the pair ahead of him, estimating the distance at about 60 meters. They were running side by side. They remained visible for the duration of the straightaway, until they passed a single small bend that does not block line of sight for long. When the following runner reached the same point, the trail ahead was empty. He expected the pair to be slightly farther up the path, but he saw no movement. He continued running and scanned both sides, thinking they might have stepped off to adjust gear or rest. The ground on either side showed no footprints leading away. The gravel surface was in good condition, with no scuff marks, no disturbance in dust, and no signs of a sudden turn. He checked the GPS track on his own watch out of curiosity, marking the last point where he saw them. When he later reported the incident, investigators compared his location with the data recovered from the missing runners' devices. The anomaly was immediate. Both runners' GPS tracks ended at almost the same coordinate. Not a fade, not a signal drift, a clean stop. Their pace line on the graph showed normal movement until the exact second the location data ceased. There was no recorded slowdown, no erratic pathing, and no change in direction. The devices did not record any elevation spike or sudden descent. The signals halted, as if both runners stopped moving at the same moment. Investigators initially suspected device malfunction, but the watches remained functional when collected from the runner's vehicle later. The data storage was intact. The battery readings were normal. Only the movement log showed interruption. The runner who witnessed the disappearance said he heard nothing unusual. No rockfall, no snapped branches, no human voice. The trail environment is open enough that even light disturbances carry. He reported complete silence. The section where the GPS tracks ended was examined closely. Rangers looked for prints belonging to either runner. The ground showed no identifiable impressions matching their shoes, even though the earlier part of the trail recorded them clearly. The surface appeared undisturbed, as if no one had passed through at all. No clothing, bottles, or dropped items were found nearby. The trail ahead remained empty for the rest of the morning. Other runners passed through without reporting anything unusual. The two missing individuals had vanished somewhere along a straight, open corridor with full visibility. Search teams began their operation within hours of the report. The first responders walked the straight section of trail twice before expanding outward. They expected to find at least one indicator of where the two runners had gone. A disrupted patch of gravel, a single impression in softer soil, a sign of a fall or a quick change in direction. Nothing appeared. The surface looked uniform in every direction. The point where the GPS tracks ended became the primary focus. Rangers marked the exact coordinates and created a grid around it. Each grid square was checked by multiple responders. The gravel carried older prints from earlier hikers and runners, but there were no fresh impressions belonging to the missing pair. No partial tracks, no heel pressure points, no forward motion indicators. It was as if the runners never stepped into that part of the trail. Dog teams arrived next. They were given scent from clothing recovered from the missing runner's vehicle. The dogs followed the trail backward without issue, matching the route the runners took that morning. They moved confidently until they reached the same GPS termination point. At that coordinate, each dog slowed, circled, and stopped. None continued forward. None pulled toward either side. Handlers described the scent as ending in place, a pattern usually seen when a subject enters a vehicle or is lifted off the ground, not when someone walks or runs away. Rangers then reviewed the GPS logs from both missing runners. Each device showed clean tracking up to the same second. The timestamps lined up perfectly. The coordinates placed both individuals within a few steps of each other when the data ended. There were no transitional readings, no signal drift, and no evidence of interference. The devices did not power off. They simply stopped recording movement. Later analysis showed the accelerometer readings on both watches registered nothing after the disappearance point, as if the devices had been held motionless. A theory emerged that the runners might have left the trail quickly, moving into the low brush on either side. Searchers tested this by stepping off the main path. Even a single step created clear impressions in the soil and bent the brush. The vegetation in the area does not recover instantly. It bends and holds position for hours before rising. None of it showed disturbance. Every plant checked remained consistent with long-term growth, not recent movement. During the second sweep, responders observed something unusual about the sound environment. The straight section normally carries voices well, but at the GPS termination point, calls from one team sounded muted when heard from certain angles. There was no explanation for this. Wind was light and steady. Terrain did not change. The muted effect did not repeat consistently, but it was noted in two separate logs. A helicopter pass was performed just before sunset. Thermal equipment detected only small animals near the edges of the ridge. No human-sized heat signatures were present. The helicopter circled the area multiple times, widening the search radius each pass. The open terrain made visual tracking straightforward, yet nothing appeared. On the second day, responders checked the surrounding slopes. Both sides of the trail extend into shallow inclines that do not hide large objects. Tracks from animals were visible in the softer dirt farther down, but none of those prints intersected the area where the runners would have stepped if they had left the trail. The investigation extended to the ridgeline above the trail. A small team climbed it to search for vantage points or signs of someone scrambling upward. No evidence surfaced. No displaced gravel, no slide marks, no loose stones indicating upward movement. By the end of the 48-hour window, the operation had produced no direction of travel, no tracks leading away, no scent continuation, no gear, no discarded items, no sound reports from other runners. The GPS data and the lack of physical evidence created a clear but unexplained cutoff point. 2 adults vanished in an open corridor without leaving a trace. Shoreline disappearances usually leave some trace. Water disturbance, drag marks, gear knocked over, or at least a change in the condition of the bank. In this case, from Minnesota, 3 fishermen went missing near a lake edge where the physical evidence did not match any realistic sequence of events. Their equipment was found in a condition that suggested they had not planned to move more than a few steps. Yet all 3 vanished within a narrow window and left no direction of travel. The men arrived early in the morning. They used a small aluminum boat to cross from a public launch point to a quiet section of shoreline they had fished many times before. According to a relative who spoke to investigators, they preferred this spot because the shallow shelf created good conditions for catching walleye. The lake was calm, no wind, no boat traffic at that hour. Their boat was later found secured to a tree root with the bow rope tied in the same knot they always used. The motor was raised. The anchor was still locked in place. Everything suggested they intended to stay on shore for a while. 3 rods were propped in the sand at equal spacing. 2 tackle boxes were open. 1 coffee thermos stood upright, still warm when responders arrived. The shoreline there is a mix of sand, small stones, and patches of compact mud. It records footprints clearly. Responders noted 3 distinct sets of prints leading from the boat to the fishing spot. They were easy to identify due to differences in shoe tread. The prints then continued for several meters along the edge, stopping at a point where the sand becomes firmer. Beyond that, no fresh tracks appeared. A couple arrived at the lake later that morning and noticed the boat sitting unusually still. They initially assumed the fishermen were nearby, possibly inside the tree line. When they returned an hour later, the scene looked unchanged. The rods were still positioned the same way. The boat had not shifted. No voices or movement came from the woods behind the shoreline. After calling out and receiving no response, they contacted authorities. Responders checked the water first. The lake was clear that day with high visibility near the shore. If someone had entered the water suddenly, the sediment would show disturbance. The sand beneath the surface remained undisturbed. There were no slide marks leading into the lake, no drag patterns, and no indication of someone being pulled in. Searchers walked slowly along the bottom in both directions. Nothing suggested recent entry. The shoreline also lacked signs of departure. The sand in the area records footprints for hours unless washed by waves. But the water was calm, and the shoreline remained intact. There were no secondary tracks leading away, no impressions running parallel to the water, no prints entering the woods. The soil at the tree line was soft and dark. Any footstep would leave a clear mark. It showed no indication of movement from the fishermen. The spacing of the rods added another detail. All 3 were angled toward the lake at similar heights, positioned as if the men had stepped away, only briefly. 1 line was lightly bent, consistent with a mild tug from water movement, not a strike from a fish or a sudden grab. The drag settings on each reel were unchanged. Their personal items were still in the boat: wallets, keys, jackets, and a small cooler. Nothing suggested preparation for leaving. The men were experienced at this lake and carried enough equipment to signal distress if needed. None of those items were used. No other visitors reported hearing anything unusual. No splash, no calls for help, no signs of a struggle. The environment remained quiet the entire morning. The lake surface was smooth, and visibility across it was high. Responders concluded the men had vanished sometime between the couple's first and second pass along the shoreline. The gap was under 1 hour. The footprints suggested they had only moved within a small radius around their rods. No tracks showed any of them walking away from the area. 3 adults disappeared from a flat, open stretch of shoreline with no wind, no waves, and no disturbances in the sand or water that could explain how they left the scene. Responders began the water search immediately after securing the shoreline. The lake was calm, with almost no surface movement. Visibility in the shallows was unusually high for that area. Divers entered first, starting at the point where the fishermen's footprints ended. They expected to find some sign of entry: clothing, a dropped rod, a slide in the sediment. But the bottom near the shoreline showed no fresh disturbance. The fine sand and light silt were settled in natural patterns, untouched. Divers expanded outward following a standard sweep pattern. Depth increases slowly in that section, giving a clear gradient that usually preserves any sign of someone entering the water. They found no clothing, no gear, and no indication of recent human activity. The water remained clear, and the sediment remained layered exactly as expected under normal conditions. A sonar-equipped boat arrived next. Operators scanned the lake floor for any structure, silhouette, or debris field. The results showed only natural features: scattered rocks, submerged branches, and soft contours typical of that lake. Nothing resembling a human shape appeared in any of the scans. The operators ran the same passes twice to confirm the readings. No anomalies were detected. Responders then focused on the boat itself. If the fishermen had moved suddenly or reacted to something near the shore, gear inside the vessel might have shifted. But everything remained neatly arranged. The jackets were folded. The cooler was sealed. A fillet knife sat exactly where it was placed earlier. Nothing suggested rushing or confusion. One detail stood out. The bow rope had no strain marks. If the boat had been pulled or jolted, the knot would have tightened, or the rope would show tension lines. Neither was present. The position of the boat matched a scenario where no one had touched it since tying it off. Search teams checked the woods behind the shoreline a second time. The soil there is dark and soft, similar to garden earth. It records impressions clearly, even from small animals. Responders walked parallel lines through the trees, looking for footprints, broken seedlings, or bent stems. Nothing indicated anyone entered the woods. The undergrowth remained consistent with long-term conditions. Investigators interviewed the couple who found the scene. Their account did not change. They saw the boat, the rods, and the open tackle boxes. Nothing seemed disturbed. They heard no voices, no splashes, no signs of movement. When they returned an hour later, the scene looked exactly the same. The rods had not shifted. The boat had not rotated. The coffee thermos still stood upright. They described the area as unusually quiet, but not in any alarming way. A ranger documented another detail that did not fit normal expectations. The coffee inside the thermos remained warm enough that it must have been poured shortly before the fishermen vanished. The gap between the couple's two visits was not long enough for the liquid to cool to ambient temperature. This suggested the men were present near the shoreline, not long before the disappearance window. Search teams circled the lake as a precaution. They checked every point where someone might exit if they had swum across or drifted to another spot. No prints appeared. No clothing washed up. No signs of anyone leaving the water. The lake surface remained calm, making it unlikely that bodies or gear could move far without detection. After 2 days, the search radius expanded into surrounding land areas. Nothing emerged. Not a single directional clue indicated where the fishermen went. The boat remained tied. The rods remained upright. The sand showed no marks of departure, and the water showed no sign of entry. Investigators concluded that the disappearance did not match any known water-related incident. 3 adults vanished from a shoreline that preserved every footprint leading in and none leading out. The lake conditions were ideal for recovery, yet there was no underwater evidence of any kind. Snow normally removes uncertainty. It shows direction, weight distribution, speed, and small changes in movement. It also reveals if someone turns, slips, or backtracks. In this case from Montana, 2 photographers disappeared on an exposed snow plateau where their footprints should have told the entire story. Instead, the tracks recorded only one thing: a complete stop with no continuation of any kind. The two men were experienced hobby photographers. They often hiked into remote areas during winter to capture long-distance landscape shots. Both carried proper gear and had used the same plateau several times before. The route leading up is moderate and open, with no tree cover. The terrain above the ridge spreads out into a flat expanse of snow that stays undisturbed for long stretches between storms. They reached the plateau around noon. Weather reports from that day confirmed light wind, stable temperatures, and clear visibility. According to photos recovered later from their camera cards, they spent at least 15 minutes taking pictures in different directions. Nothing in the images showed unusual activity in the background. No other hikers, no wildlife, no blowing snow. The shadows showed consistent sun position, indicating no sudden weather shift. Their last known position came from a hiker who passed them on the ascent. He reported seeing them near the upper ridge, adjusting one of their tripods. Both appeared focused on their work. Neither showed any sign of difficulty or fatigue. He expected to see them again on his return route, but they were not present when he later descended. Responders traced the photographer's approach using their footprints. The snow showed a clear path leading upward. Each step was well defined with sharp edges, indicating recent formation. The prints continued to the plateau, then split apart slightly as the men moved around to set up their shots. Tripod impressions were found in the snow, positioned at steady intervals. The key detail came next. Both sets of footprints moved several meters away from their equipment. The tracks ran almost parallel to each other, spaced naturally, with no sign of panic or rushing. Then both sets ended. Not faded, not interrupted, not blown over by wind. They simply stopped on a section of flat snow. No outgoing tracks existed, no backtracking, no disturbance of powder around the final impressions. Snow analysis showed no crust formation or melting that could hide tracks. The wind that day was too gentle to erase footprints, especially ones as deep as those created by two adults carrying winter gear. The final prints were crisp and intact when responders arrived. The area around the termination point offered no cover. The plateau has no crevasses, no sudden drops, and no cornice collapses near that location. The nearest depression in the terrain was too far to reach without leaving marks, and responders checked it anyway. Nothing was found. The snow surface remained continuous and unbroken. Equipment left behind also raised questions. One tripod stood open with the camera attached and powered off. Another leaned on its side with no scratch marks below it, as if it had been placed there gently rather than dropped. Gloves belonging to one of the photographers were folded near a packed snow mound. Yet there were no kneeling impressions beside them, something that should appear if someone had removed items at that spot. The search team expected to find at least a partial continuation of one track line. Even a single misplaced step, a slip, or a shift in body orientation would leave a signature in snow. Instead, they found nothing beyond the final footprints. No sign of an animal approach, no drag patterns, no marks from poles or equipment. Two adults walked in a straight line on a flat, unobstructed snowfield and left no trace after the last clean print. Responders began by documenting the last footprints in detail. Each impression showed clear edges and defined heel-to-toe placement. Snow depth was consistent across the plateau. Wind speed recorded at a nearby station was low enough that surface texture should have remained unchanged for hours. Nothing in the environment supported the idea that tracks could vanish naturally. The termination point looked as if the men had walked to it, stopped, and never taken another step. Search teams expanded outward in concentric circles. In snow, this method reveals any sign of direction. Even a single misplaced step, an offset angle or partial imprint can indicate where someone went. But every sweep produced the same result. Smooth, undisturbed snow extended in all directions. No compression marks, no shallow impressions, no irregular patterns. The plateau looked untouched beyond the area where the photographers last walked. Responders then examined the equipment left behind. The first tripod stood upright, anchored firmly in the snow. The second tripod lay on its side, but the snow beneath it was level. If it had fallen, even gently, it should have created a small indentation or disturbed loose snow. None existed. The legs rested on the surface as if placed there deliberately. A lens cap sat nearby on the snow crust without a depression beneath it, suggesting minimal vertical movement before landing. A search dog team arrived and began tracking from the approach trail. The dogs followed the ascent path without difficulty. They reached the plateau, circled the equipment, and continued toward the termination point. Once there, they behaved in the same way seen in previous group disappearances. Each dog stopped directly at the final footprints. They sniffed, circled twice, then sat facing outward. No dog attempted to move beyond that line. Handlers described the scent as ending in place, a pattern usually associated with subjects entering a vehicle or being physically removed from the ground. A helicopter sweep was conducted in early afternoon when visibility was optimal. The plateau is open and flat, making aerial detection highly effective. Thermal imaging showed no heat signatures across the snow surface. The helicopter expanded its range and ran passes along the ridgeline, the surrounding slopes, and the valley below. No human-sized signals appeared. The pilot noted that snow cover was uniform and showed no breaks or collapse patterns. Later, a second aerial pass using high-resolution imaging searched for color contrast or object outlines. Responders reviewed the images frame by frame. Only natural snow formations were identified. No clothing, gear, or bodies appeared in any of the frames. The camera equipment the men brought was later inspected. The memory cards contained no images indicating sudden movement, weather change, or anything approaching the photographers. On the plateau itself, responders tested the snow for structural weaknesses. They probed the area around the termination point to check for hollow sections or hidden gaps. The snowpack was solid. No cavities existed beneath the surface. Depth varied by only a few centimeters across the search zone. The idea that the men fell through a hidden pocket was ruled out immediately. Investigators checked the nearest slope for slide marks. If either man had slipped downhill, even a short distance, the snow would show disruption. No such marks existed. The slope remained unbroken. A slide event would also leave debris patterns or compacted snow at the bottom. Responders found none. By the second day, teams expanded the search perimeter far beyond the plateau. Every likely route was checked. Even improbable routes were examined. Nothing suggested movement in any direction. No dropped items were discovered. No secondary footprints were located. The official log notes that the disappearance was incompatible with snow behavior. The environment should have preserved every step the men made. Instead, it preserved none after the final impression. The plateau was later revisited after a thaw cycle. Melt patterns revealed no objects beneath the surface and no trace of human presence beyond the equipment on the day of the disappearance. Campground disappearances usually involve one person walking off, not an entire family. Campsites provide structure. Tents, chairs, cooking setups, and personal items create a visible pattern. When people leave suddenly, those patterns change. Items fall over, food spills, fires die unevenly. But in this case, from Utah, none of those indicators appeared. A family of 4 vanished from a campsite, and everything they left behind suggested they intended to return within minutes. The family arrived the previous afternoon. Their vehicle was parked in a designated pullout beside the campsite. The tent was set up properly, with stakes secured. A folding table stood near the fire ring, with a small gas stove on top. Food preparation items were laid out in a way that suggested an upcoming meal rather than a completed one. A cooler sat partially open with condensation still fresh inside. A neighboring camper later told investigators they heard the family talking shortly before the disappearance. The voices included 2 adults and at least 1 child. The neighbor described the conversation as casual, mentioning meal planning and weather. Nothing sounded tense or urgent. They heard no argument, no raised voices, and no signs of distress. When the neighbor next glanced toward the site, less than 15 minutes had passed. The entire area was silent. No movement, no voices, no shadows. The neighbor assumed the family had walked to the nearby overlook, a short path behind the campsite. But when they went to check, the path showed no fresh footprints. The dust there is soft and holds impressions for a long time. No marks appeared from shoes, sandals, or the child's smaller footwear. Responders arrived later that day after the neighbor reported concerns. The campsite looked undisturbed. Chairs remained positioned around the fire ring. A kettle sat over low flames, with water still warm. The gas stove was lit on the lowest setting. A bag of marshmallows lay open with no signs of animals touching it. A flashlight sat on the table, still powered on, pointing at the tent entrance. Inside the tent, sleeping bags were unzipped. A phone rested on top of one of them, still charging from a battery pack. A child's jacket lay folded near the door. Nothing was packed or moved. No bags were opened. No clothing was missing. Responders found no indication the family prepared to leave voluntarily. The campground soil is a mix of fine dust, gravel, and loose rock. Fresh tracks stand out clearly. Investigators noted only the family's arrival prints and various older impressions from previous campers. No recent tracks left the site. Nothing indicated a walk toward the overlook, the creek, the restroom area, or the main trail. There were no drag marks, no sprint marks, and no signs of rapid movement. Responders checked the fire ring. The heat level suggested the family had been present very recently when they disappeared. The wood arrangement showed no collapse pattern, which happens when logs are bumped or kicked. Everything at the site pointed to a moment where activity simply stopped. The surrounding vegetation provided no answers. The shrubs around the campsite were undisturbed. No branches were bent. No leaves were broken. Nothing showed compression from a person moving through. The area behind the site slopes slightly downward. Soil samples taken from that slope showed no fresh impressions. A ranger inspecting the kitchen setup noted another detail. A pot lid sat on the ground beside the table. Dust on its top indicated it had been there for at least several minutes. But dust beneath it was clean, meaning it had been placed there gently and not dropped. It suggested someone paused mid-preparation and never returned. The neighbor who overheard the family said the entire campsite went from active to silent in less than the time it took to boil a kettle. They described the shift as abrupt, but not violent. There was simply no activity when there should have been. 4 people disappeared from an established campsite, leaving every sign they intended to resume what they were doing. Responders began their search by establishing a perimeter around the campsite. The boundary was small at first, based on the assumption that the family had walked to a nearby feature. But as teams checked each possible direction, the perimeter expanded quickly. There were no footprints indicating movement away from the site, despite the ground being ideal for tracking. Dust, loose gravel, and dry soil all preserve impressions clearly. Nothing new appeared. Only the family's arrival tracks were visible. Teams examined the tent again. The items inside had not shifted. Sleeping bags remained spread out in normal use positions. A child's toy sat near one corner with no dust shift around it. If someone had picked it up and dropped it, or if the tent had moved from activity, the dust pattern would have shown it. It remained unchanged. The battery pack connected to the phone still indicated charging. The percentage increase recorded on the device suggested the phone had been connected recently, likely within the hour before the disappearance. Searchers checked the fire ring next. Wood pieces were still arranged in a triangular layout used by campers who intend to maintain a low flame. The edges of the kindling were unburned. The fire had not been left unattended long enough to change shape or collapse. The presence of warm water in the kettle supported the idea that the family had been at the site only minutes earlier. From there, responders moved toward the overlook path. The dust on that trail is fine and dry. It shows impressions clearly in the morning before wind patterns change. Teams walked it slowly, scanning for any recent disturbance. There were none. No prints from adult shoes, no prints from the child's smaller boots, no scuff marks. Even the slight dragging pattern that children often leave on dusty trails was absent. Nothing suggested the family walked that direction. Teams checking the creek path encountered the same result. The soil there is slightly darker and holds moisture longer. Fresh prints show as darkened depressions. None were present. A ranger knelt to inspect the edge where the trail meets the water. The sediment was smooth and undisturbed. No foot had stepped through the area since early morning, hours before the family last spoke. Handlers brought in 2 scent dog teams. The dogs were given scent from clothing found inside the tent. Both dogs moved confidently around the campsite, circling multiple times, then walked to the fire ring, the tent door, and the folding table. After that, the dogs returned to the tent entrance again, then sat down. Neither team attempted to pull beyond the immediate perimeter. Neither indicated movement toward the trail, the creek, the overlook, or the parking area. Handlers described the scent pattern as ending inside the campsite, with no continuation beyond the family's known location. Responders expanded the search outward. They checked the tree line behind the campsite. The vegetation there is sparse. Branches break easily, and leaves snap loudly when stepped on. But none were broken. No stems were bent. The ground beneath the trees showed no disturbed soil. Sweep teams walked in tight formations, covering every meter, but found no signs of movement. The forest was quiet, and nothing suggested the family had entered it. A helicopter sweep began just after sunset. Thermal imaging showed no human-sized heat signatures within the search radius. The campsite itself appeared as a cluster of warm spots from the fire ring and heated objects, but nothing alive showed nearby. The helicopter performed multiple passes at different elevations. The area remained clear. Responders noted the consistency of stillness at the site. The kettle remained at the same angle. The chairs were undisturbed. The marshmallow bag remained open with no bite marks or tearing, which ruled out animal interference. The stove flame remained stable until responders shut it off. Nothing pointed to rushing or sudden movement. Every detail suggested the family had been present, stopped what they were doing, and did not resume. With no direction of travel, no footprint evidence, and no disturbance indicators, the disappearance produced no practical lead. The site provided no explanation for how 4 people left without leaving a trace. Rock surfaces normally limit what can be tracked, but they also remove ambiguity. A person walking on bare stone leaves scuff marks, dust displacement, micro scratches, or at least a consistent direction. When someone slips, the impact leaves an obvious signature. In this case, from Arizona, 2 brothers disappeared on a flat rock terrace where none of those indicators appeared. The surface recorded nothing except the fact that they had been there minutes before. The 2 brothers were traveling with their sister. They stopped at a viewpoint along a desert trail where a large flat stone shelf overlooks a series of distant mesas. The terrace is wide and open, with no vegetation and no depressions that could hide a person. It drops off sharply in one direction, but the edge is visible and predictable. People can approach it safely if they watch their footing. The siblings had been taking photos together. Their sister captured several images of them near the edge, smiling and pointing toward distant formations. The shadows in the photos show consistent time progression. Nothing unusual appears in the background. No other hikers, no dust plumes, no animals. At some point, the brothers moved farther out onto the terrace to photograph a rock formation below. Their sister walked a few steps back toward their packs to adjust her gear. She later estimated that she looked away from them for no more than 10 seconds. When she turned back, both were gone. She walked to the exact area where they had been standing. The stone surface was level and unbroken. There were no cracks large enough to enter, no loose slabs, no shift marks. The drop-off behind the terrace is steep but straight. If someone had fallen, dust and rock would have dislodged. The ledge below would show fresh marks. But when responders examined it later, the surface showed no new fractures or debris. The sister called out repeatedly, expecting at least an echo return. The terrace usually reflects sound well, but she reported no reply and no unusual echo patterns. The environment remained unchanged. The air was still. There was no indication of sudden wind or environmental shift. Responders arrived within an hour of the call. They walked the terrace in expanding arcs. The stone showed no new scuffs or disruptions. Small loose grit on the surface remained undisturbed. Even experienced trackers could not identify anything indicating a direction the brothers might have taken. The edge of the terrace became the next focus. A wide safety buffer exists before the true drop, and footprints normally show in the thin dust that accumulates there. But the buffer held only older marks from earlier visitors. No fresh impressions, no drag lines, no slide marks from someone losing balance. The area below the drop was checked next. Rangers accessed the lower level using a climbing route and inspected the rock face. There were no new scrapes, no fabric fibers, and no sign that anyone had landed there. Loose rock debris normally shifts when impacted, but nothing had moved. The ground at the base held undisturbed dust, no footprints, no rolling stone patterns. The sister's account remained consistent. She said both brothers had stood upright, not close to the edge, and were adjusting their camera settings. Neither showed signs of instability. Both wore sturdy shoes. There was no sudden noise, no warning, no sign of an animal, no other people nearby. Everything suggested they should have been visible somewhere on the rock shelf or below it. Instead, the terrace appeared unchanged, as if no one had walked across it at all. Two adults disappeared from a flat stone surface with full visibility and no environmental activity to explain it. Responders began by rechecking the rock terrace under controlled conditions. 3 rangers walked the same route the brothers had taken, testing how much disturbance normal movement creates on the stone surface. Even light steps produced faint scuffs. When boots shifted slightly, small patches of dust moved. These marks remained visible for several minutes before wind carried them away. But on the day of the disappearance, wind was minimal, and the dust layer around the terrace showed no fresh movement at all. The search expanded outward. Rangers formed a perimeter around the terrace and moved in overlapping paths. Each responder watched the ground closely for small disturbances, displaced grit, chipped stone, or fabric fibers snagged on rough edges. None were found. The area appeared untouched, as if no one had crossed it after the sister stepped away. Attention then focused on the drop-off. A fall in that location always leaves a trace. Even a controlled descent produces visible signs. Loose stones scatter. Dust trails form. Edges chip. When responders inspected the ledge below, everything remained consistent with long-term weathering. No fresh rock fractures appeared. No dust streaks descended the face. They checked lower sections as well, using ropes to examine outcrops that are normally hidden from above. All surfaces appeared undisturbed. A helicopter arrived later that afternoon. The flight path included a vertical view of the cliff face, the slope below, and the wider desert floor. Thermal imaging detected no heat signatures along the rock walls or the base. High-resolution photos were taken for comparison. Analysts later reviewed them frame by frame. No evidence of bodies, gear, or disturbed vegetation appeared. From above, the terrain showed nothing that matched the disappearance scenario. A second team arrived to conduct acoustic tests. The terrace usually reflects sound clearly across the open space. Responders tested vocal ranges at multiple distances to determine how far a shout travels. Under similar wind and temperature conditions, voices carried several hundred meters. If the brothers had fallen, called out, or encountered any hazard, sound should have traveled across the terrace and down the slope. No hikers in the surrounding area reported hearing anything. The sister confirmed she heard nothing abnormal before or after the moment she looked away. Investigators then examined the route below the terrace, where runoff sometimes creates soft pockets. If the brothers had descended without falling, even intentionally, their shoes would have left impressions in the fine sand patches along the lower rim. Responders searched every depression. No prints appeared. No compressed vegetation. No brake marks. The possibility of a rapid descent into a slot or fissure was considered. Geological maps showed no cracks large enough to hold a person. The visible fissures near the terrace were shallow and narrow. Responders lowered cameras into the widest gaps, but found only debris, insects, and long-term sediment. Dust samples were collected from the terrace to determine how easily the surface records movement. The analysis confirmed that recent footsteps create patterns detectable for several minutes to hours, depending on wind. Yet the dust layer across the terrace remained consistent, with only older, faint patterns unrelated to the brothers' footwear. Rangers inspected the location where the sister had been standing. They found her impressions clearly visible. The tracks aligned with her account and timing. But no fresh prints led away from where the brothers had been standing. If they had walked, stepped aside, or even shifted weight, the dust should have shown it. The search extended through the night and into the next day. No gear turned up, no dropped items, no water bottles, no camera straps. The only belongings at the scene were the sisters and the equipment the brothers had set down earlier. The incident log notes that the disappearance provided no directional indicator. The rock terrace offered no cover, no hazard, and no visual obstruction. The environment did not support any known method of leaving the area undetected. Group disappearances with a guide present are extremely rare. A guide maintains visual contact, monitors pacing, and keeps the group together on exposed terrain. In this case, from New Mexico, 3 tourists vanished on a wide, open trail section where the guide had full visibility. The incident occurred in daylight, in stable weather, with no terrain features that could hide movement. The group consisted of a professional guide and 3 tourists visiting from out of state. They were hiking a well-known ridge trail that offers long, unobstructed views in nearly every direction. The surface is a mix of compact sand and small stones. Foot impressions remain visible for hours unless heavy wind disrupts them. On the day of the disappearance, wind levels were low. According to the guide, the group had been walking at a steady pace. No depressions, no overhangs. The nearest turn is over 100 meters away. The guide stated that he walked ahead about 5 meters before pausing to point out a landmark on the horizon. He expected the group to catch up within seconds. When he turned, the trail behind him was empty. He walked back immediately. Visibility remained clear. He called out their names. There was no answer. The trail surface ahead and behind him showed only their existing tracks. No new impressions branched off to the sides. No scuff marks indicated quick movement. No slide patterns showed anyone stumbling or running. The guide searched in widening circles around the point where the tourists had been moments earlier. The ground there held their footprints clearly. All 3 sets stopped at nearly the same spot. The final impressions were normal, flat, even weight distribution, no signs of sudden turning. After those prints, the ground showed only undisturbed sand and small stones. The guide used his radio to contact the outfitter. Responders arrived within an hour and immediately questioned him. His account remained consistent each time. He insisted he had maintained visual contact up until the moment he turned to point out the landmark. There had been no sound prior to the disappearance, no movement in peripheral vision, no dust disturbance. Nothing to indicate that the tourists walked, ran, or fell. Responders performed an initial sweep along both sides of the ridge. The slopes are gentle enough that any descent would leave clear signs: compressed vegetation, rolling stones, disturbed sand. But the slopes appeared unchanged. No tracks led down either side. Loose stones remained in natural patterns. Sand along the ridge edges was smooth. One responder noted the silence of the location. Even small movements usually echo across the ridge. But during the first search pass, calls seemed to diffuse instead of traveling outward. The guide mentioned he had noticed the same phenomenon moments after the disappearance. The incident log recorded this as abnormal sound behavior, though no environmental cause was identified. A check of the tourists' packs showed no missing items. They had not accessed gear since the last break. Their water bottles were still mostly full. Sunglasses and hats remained inside the packs. Nothing suggested preparation to leave the trail. The guide was tested for heat stress and disorientation, but medical staff found no issues. His timestamps on devices matched his account of the timeline. His GPS tracker showed no deviation from the trail. The tourists' GPS pings, recorded by their phones intermittently due to the remote area, stopped updating at the same approximate location where their footprints ended. 3 adults vanished on an open ridge trail under direct supervision, leaving no physical indication of where they went. Search teams began by re-examining the footprint lines the guide identified. The impressions were clear and recent. All 3 tourists walked in a straight formation behind him. The final prints showed normal stride length and weight distribution. No hesitation marks. No inward or outward pivoting. Nothing to indicate a sudden change in behavior. After the last set of impressions, the ground surface returned to untouched sand and stone, with no transition or partial step. Responders then moved to the ridge edges. The slope on the west side tapers down gradually into brush. Any attempt to descend would have disturbed the loose sand and scattered stones, but the sand remained smooth, with natural wind patterns intact. The stones were settled in long-term positions, showing no recent rolling. Teams descended part-way to inspect shrubs and grass patches. None were bent or broken. No signs of compression appeared on the vegetation. The east side is steeper, but still fully exposed. If a person had slipped, there would be drag trails or a slide path. Responders checked the slope carefully. No scuff marks appeared. No disturbed grit. No fresh rock debris. The edge itself had no chipped sections, which are common when boots strike stone during a fall. Even the smallest pebbles showed untouched positions. A helicopter sweep began within the first 2 hours. Thermal imaging showed no heat signatures along the ridge, slopes, or surrounding lowlands. The helicopter made multiple passes at different angles, including vertical imaging. Nothing indicated bodies, gear, or movement. The ridge is open enough that even small contrasting objects should show clearly from above. None did. Dog teams reached the site shortly after. Handlers used scent from clothing retrieved from the tourist's vehicle. The dogs followed the ascent trail normally, confirming the group's route. They reached the section where the tourists disappeared, circled the final footprints, and then stalled. None pulled toward the ridge edges. None continued along the trail. They walked a few steps in multiple directions, then returned to the same central point and sat down. Handlers described the scent pattern as terminating abruptly, with no outward continuation. Investigators then examined the guide's route and timestamps. His GPS tracker recorded a consistent pace and matched his statement precisely. No jumps or gaps appeared in his location history. The tourists' phones, although not actively tracking, had intermittent network pings earlier in the hike. The final ping from any device occurred within meters of the termination point. No further activity registered, even after hours of searching. Responders widened the perimeter. They walked every direction from the disappearance site in a grid pattern. This ridge is not large, and visibility over the terrain is excellent. A person walking even a short distance would appear against the open background. But no movement was ever seen. No secondary footprints appeared. No dropped gear. No tracks from animals. The entire ridge remained quiet and unchanged. The guide was interviewed multiple times. His account never shifted. He described turning forward for only a moment to point at a landmark. He said the trail behind him was fully visible. There was no sound that indicated movement, no dust disturbances, no shift in light or shadow. When he turned back, the trail was empty. Responders tested sound behavior again at the location. Shouts traveled less efficiently than expected. Voices seemed to lose strength a few meters away instead of projecting across the ridge. Equipment readings showed nothing unusual in temperature or wind to explain it. The effect was inconsistent, but noted by multiple team members. Teams searched late into the evening. The ridge, slopes, brush areas, and adjacent valley floor produced no trace. No footprints leading away. No signs of voluntary departure. No signs of an accident. No directional evidence at all. By the second day, search operations extended several kilometers in every direction. Nothing suggested the tourists ever left the point where their tracks ended. The disappearance presented no physical mechanism, no movement signature, and no environmental explanation. Moss-covered trails normally reveal every step. Even soft impressions remain visible for hours. A person's weight compresses the surface, leaving darker, flattened patches that stand out clearly. In this case, from Washington, a group of 5 hikers disappeared one by one on a narrow forest trail while still within visible range of each other. Only partial track patterns remained, and none of them showed a direction of departure. The group consisted of 2 friends, a married couple, and a distant relative visiting from out of state. They had planned a short hike through a dense but well-marked forest corridor. The trail is narrow, with thick moss carpeting the ground on both sides. The canopy overhead reduces wind, so the moss retains footprints unusually well. Weather conditions were stable. Light cloud cover. No rain. No fog. According to messages found later on one hiker's phone, they were moving slowly and taking photos of the forest interior. Nothing in the photos showed unusual subjects or unexpected figures. The path ahead in every image looked normal. The first disappearance occurred mid-afternoon. The group led, one of the friends, walked ahead by a few meters to photograph a fallen tree. The others rounded a bend moments later and saw the section of trail empty. His pack lay near the moss edge, but his trekking pole leaned upright against a tree as if placed intentionally. The moss showed a clean footprint line leading to where he had been standing, but no prints continued past that point. The group called his name repeatedly. The forest in that area carries sound well, and echoes usually travel long distances. This time, there was no reply, no rustling, no quick animal movement. The environment remained silent. The 4 remaining hikers stayed close together as they searched the immediate area. The moss around the disappearance point showed no disturbance, no dragged patches, no crushed plants, no bent ferns. The trail had no side exits for several meters. The group decided to move slowly toward the last solid GPS point recorded on the missing man's device earlier that day. About 15 minutes later, the second disappearance occurred. One of the married couple lagged slightly behind to retie a boot. The others continued forward, but still kept him in view. When they looked back seconds later, he was gone. The moss where he had stood showed a single deep print and one partial, as if he shifted weight, but nothing beyond it. No continuation prints, no exit direction. His pack straps were unbuckled, lying lightly on the moss with no compression around them, suggesting they had been placed there rather than dropped. Now frightened, the remaining 3 hikers stayed within arm's reach of each other. They spoke continuously to avoid losing contact. The trees around them were thick, but not dense enough to hide someone passing through. The moss in the understory was deep and fragile. Even a single step off the trail would leave a clear depression. No such marks appeared. They decided to turn back toward the trailhead, hoping to reach an area with more hikers. According to the last text drafted, but not sent, on the surviving woman's phone, they could still see each other clearly. That message timestamp placed them less than 30 minutes from the trail entrance. The third disappearance happened next. The visiting relative, who had been walking in the middle, stopped briefly to adjust a jacket sleeve. The couple walked ahead only 3 or 4 steps. When they turned to check on him, he was no longer there. The moss showed a clean, flat print, but no pressure marks beyond it. His phone remained on the trail, screen down, without a scratch. If it had been dropped, the moss would show a compressed patch beneath it. Instead, the surface was smooth, indicating deliberate placement. At this point, the married couple began to run. They stayed close enough that neither left the other's sight. They advanced quickly along the narrow corridor. The forest remained silent. No animal activity. No snapped branches. No footfall from any direction. The moss ahead remained unmarked, but the trail behind them now carried only their previous footprints. 2 people remained, moving toward an exit they could still see through the trees. The married couple covered the next stretch of trail quickly. They stayed close enough that one could reach out and touch the other. Both kept looking behind them, checking the moss for movement or disturbances. The forest remained silent. No birdsong, no distant hikers, no shifting branches. The quiet made every step sound sharper than usual. Their footprints pressed clearly into the moss behind them, forming a visible path. They were less than 10 minutes from the trail entrance when the 4th disappearance happened. According to the surviving tracks and the position of the remaining gear, the couple paused briefly. One of them stepped off to the side to check a noise they believed came from deeper in the forest. The other remained on the trail, maintaining visual contact. That second person vanished without leaving any continuation imprint. Responders later examined the moss where the final 2 had stood. The remaining hiker's last position was indicated by a single, deep impression, more compressed than previous prints, suggesting increased weight shift or fear. A second footprint belonging to the spouse was positioned slightly ahead of it, but no next step existed. No direction, no partial print. The moss ahead was smooth, untouched. The lone remaining hiker appears to have run after that. The moss showed a sudden change in stride length. Some prints were deeper, indicating faster movement. Others were angled, showing she had looked back repeatedly while moving forward. The pattern extended for roughly 30 meters toward the trail entrance. Then it ended in a cluster of 3 prints, one deep, one normal, one partial. Responders described the termination point as inconsistent with forward travel. The deep print was placed firmly, as if the runner stopped abruptly. The partial print beside it looked like the beginning of a pivot. The final shallow print had almost no depth, as if only the front of the foot contacted the moss. After that, no more impressions appeared. The moss surface resumed its natural texture. Her backpack lay 5 feet away, unzipped, but upright. There was no compression beneath it. If it had fallen, the moss would have been flattened. Instead, the surface underneath remained undisturbed, meaning the pack had been placed deliberately. A water bottle rested beside it with no tilt marks. A pair of sunglasses sat in the moss without indentation. Responders followed standard procedure and expanded the search immediately. They checked the understory first. Moss in that area collapses instantly under weight and takes hours to rebound. But the vegetation beneath the trees showed no disturbance, no crushed sections, no bent ferns, no displaced bark. The forest floor was intact. Dog teams were brought in shortly afterward. Each dog followed the runner's track line without difficulty until reaching the 3 final impressions. At that point, all dogs displayed the same behavior seen in earlier cases. They circled, sniffed outward in multiple directions, then sat facing the trail entrance. None pulled away. None followed a scent into the trees. Handlers noted the absence of scent continuation and recorded it as an abrupt termination. A helicopter sweep began within the hour. The canopy in that corridor is thin enough for thermal imaging to penetrate. The entire area was scanned multiple times. No heat signatures appeared. No movement patterns showed in the upper branches or understory. The helicopter widened its radius, checking adjacent trails and cross paths. Nothing emerged. Ground teams performed a grid search for 2 days. Moss depth, soil patches, and exposed roots were checked. Every likely route was examined. The only disturbances found were the group's original footprints. No secondary tracks appeared in any direction. The responders' final report noted that the trail layout made it impossible for 5 people to disappear without leaving directional evidence. The environment should have preserved every step. Instead, The tracks stopped one by one until none remained. No motion indicators, no fall marks, no entry into vegetation, no prints beyond the final impressions. A complete group disappearance on a narrow trail where all movement should have been visible.